morning at the corporate headquarters, but no one could have predicted what would happen next. The CEO, who was known for his cold, calculated demeanor, stood before the entire company, his eyes scanning the room. His voice echoed through the spacious conference hall, sending chills down the spines of even the most seasoned employees. "We're about to test something that can change everything," he said, his words sharp and deliberate. "This test will separate the loyal from the opportunists. It will reveal who is truly committed to this company, and who is only here for personal gain." The room fell silent. No one had expected this. The employees exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether this was a prank or something far more serious. Whispers began to circulate as the tension grew thick. The CEO's reputation for being ruthless was no secret, but this felt different. This wasn't about profits or targets, it was something more personal, something more dangerous. One by one, the employees looked at each other, some with fear in their eyes, others with curiosity. The CEO paused, taking a long look at the crowd, as if savoring the moment. He wasn't just addressing them as employees, he was looking for something deeper, something more intangible. And that realization made everyone uneasy. "What happens next," the CEO continued, "will change everything. We will see who steps up when it counts, and who will crumble under pressure. Consider this a loyalty test, your future here depends on how you respond." The words hit like a shockwave. This was no ordinary challenge. The stakes were higher than anyone could have imagined. The CEO's loyalty test wasn't just about business strategies or making the right decisions, it was about revealing the true nature of those in the room. And no one knew what that would mean for them. Suddenly, the air felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were closing in. Everyone knew that this test could make or break them, but the true implications remained a mystery. Who would rise to the challenge, and who would fall? The uncertainty lingered in the air, and the entire room was left wondering, what kind of loyalty was the CEO truly testing? And what price would they have to pay to prove it? As the CEO turned and walked out of the room without another word, the employees were left standing, stunned and speechless. The test had begun, but no one could predict how it would unfold. They were about to face a challenge that would not only test their loyalty to the company, but to themselves as well. And in the coming days, the true nature of their commitment would be revealed in ways none of them could have anticipated. Part 2. The CEO's reputation ***. The CEO was not a man of warmth. His reputation preceded him, a man who had built an empire on ruthless decisions and unrelenting ambition. His rise to power was marked by calculated moves, eliminating competitors, and staying several steps ahead of everyone around him. No one doubted his ability to lead, it was his coldness that caused whispers in the hallways. He rarely showed emotion, and when he did, it was often because something had gone terribly wrong. Those who had worked closely with him knew better than to get too comfortable. He was not the type of leader to tolerate failure, and his expectations were impossible to meet for most. Yet, his company thrived, and under his leadership, it reached heights that others could only dream of. But there was something about today's test that felt different. It wasn't just a challenge to prove professional skills or knowledge, it felt personal. It was a loyalty test, and no one could understand why it was happening now. The timing was odd. The company was doing well, profits were up, and the employees seemed more content than they had in years. There was no obvious reason to stir the pot. But the CEO had his reasons, hidden behind that calm, impenetrable facade of his. As the employees filed out of the conference room, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. They knew that if they wanted to succeed in this test, they would need to get inside the CEO's mind. The problem was, no one could do that. Not even the people who had been with him for years understood what made him tick. Some employees immediately began to speculate. "Maybe it's a way to see who can handle pressure," one muttered, but another countered, "No, it's more than that. It's about loyalty to him, to the company. He's not the kind of person who cares about anything but results." A few of the more ambitious employees saw this as an opportunity. They knew that if they played their cards right, this test could be their ticket to a faster promotion. Others, more cautious, felt a sense of dread. If this was about loyalty, how could they possibly pass without knowing the rules? What if they failed, without even understanding what the CEO was looking for? In the days that followed, the tension grew. The usual buzz of the office was replaced by whispers and furtive glances. Everyone seemed to be on edge, wondering what the next move would be. Some had already started to think about their next steps. If this test didn't go well, would they be out of a job? Would they even be safe from the CEO's ruthless judgment? The rumors only added to the unease. Some claimed that the CEO had orchestrated loyalty tests before, but no one had ever seen one this intense. It wasn't just about making decisions, it was about something deeper. Perhaps this test was a way to weed out the weak, to see who would stand by him when it mattered most. No one was certain, but they all knew one thing: if they were going to survive this, they would need to prove themselves in ways they hadn't expected. The CEO, meanwhile, remained as elusive as ever. He showed up to meetings with the same cold detachment, offering no clues as to what he was really thinking. To him, this test was likely already over in his mind. He was always 5 steps ahead, and the employees had no way of knowing which move he would make next. But one thing was clear: the loyalty test had begun, and no one would leave it unchanged. Whether they succeeded or failed, the consequences would be far-reaching. And as the days passed, the employees began to realize that the test was far more than just a business challenge. It was a test of character, of what they were willing to sacrifice for success. The moment the CEO left the conference room, a wave of uncertainty settled over the employees. Some stood frozen, still processing what had just happened, while others rushed back to their desks, their minds already working through the possibilities. The air was thick with nervous energy. No one knew what the CEO had planned, but they all understood one thing: this was not just a game. The whispers started immediately. "What do you think the test is?" someone muttered. "Maybe he wants to see who will try to cheat their way through," another speculated. "No, it's a trap," someone else whispered. "He wants us to think one way and act another. He's always 10 steps ahead. If we try too hard, we might fail without even realizing it." Everyone had their own theories, but no one had answers. The CEO had given them no details, just a test that could change everything. Some employees saw it as an opportunity, a chance to impress him and move up in the company. Others saw it as a dangerous game, where one wrong move could cost them everything. Then came the first sign that the test was already in motion. An email popped up in everyone's inbox. No sender, no subject, just a single sentence: "The test has already begun. Be careful who you trust." The tension skyrocketed. Employees exchanged wary glances. It wasn't just about proving their loyalty anymore, something bigger was happening. Slowly, small groups began to form. Some employees huddled together, discussing strategies, trying to predict what the CEO was looking for. Others withdrew into themselves, afraid to say or do anything that could be used against them. A few confident ones walked around with a smirk, convinced they could outthink the CEO. But deep down, everyone felt the same thing: fear. Would this test force them to betray someone? Would they be asked to do something unethical? Or was the real test in their reactions, in the way they treated each other now that paranoia had set in? One employee took the bold approach and walked directly into the CEO's office, demanding answers. He never returned to his desk. His belongings were cleared out by security within an hour. The message was clear: the CEO was watching, and the test was very, very real. Employees began to second-guess everything. Could they trust their coworkers? Was this a team effort, or was every man for himself? If they tried too hard to prove their loyalty, would it backfire? If they didn't try at all, would they fail? By the end of the day, the office didn't feel the same anymore. It wasn't a place of work, it was a battlefield. And the CEO, hidden behind his polished desk, was pulling the strings, watching how his employees moved like pawns on a chessboard. The loyalty test had begun in full force. And no one knew how it would end. By the next morning, the atmosphere in the office had changed entirely. What was once a place of routine had become a silent war zone. Employees moved cautiously, careful with their words, their actions. Every conversation felt like a game of chess, every decision weighed carefully. No one knew what the CEO was looking for, and that made every choice a potential risk. Then, something unexpected happened. One of the senior managers, a man known for his unwavering confidence, walked into the office as usual, holding his morning coffee, exchanging nods with his team. But when he reached his desk, he stopped cold. His computer screen was black. A single message in white text flashed across it: "Your loyalty has been noted. Your actions will determine your future." The blood drained from his face. Others noticed his reaction and gathered around, whispering. Then, similar messages began appearing on other screens across the office. Some employees received the same vague warning, while others saw different words. Do you know who your real allies are? What would you sacrifice for success? Some have already failed. Will you be next? Panic spread. What did these messages mean? Was the test tracking their every move? Some employees rushed to HR, but no one there had answers. Others sat frozen at their desks, afraid to touch their keyboards, worried that the wrong action could mean the end of their career. Then came the real shock. An emergency meeting was called in the main conference room. The CEO wasn't there, but one of his senior executives addressed the employees. His tone was cold, emotionless. "There are those among you who have already failed this test," he announced. "Their choices have disqualified them. They are no longer with us." A wave of gasps rippled through the room. Fired? Just like that? No warnings, no explanations? From this point forward, the executive continued, "Every action, every decision, every word you speak will determine whether you pass or fail. This is not just about loyalty to the company, it is about loyalty to our values. Those who don't align with them will be removed." The room fell into stunned silence. The test wasn't just about proving themselves to the CEO. It was about something deeper, something more personal. And the scariest part? No one knew exactly what they were being judged on. That night, employees left the office in silence, their minds racing. What was the real purpose of this test? Why was the CEO pushing them to such extremes? And most importantly, who had already failed? The game had changed. And for those who were still left, the hardest choices were yet to come. The next morning, the tension in the office was unbearable. Conversations were hushed, glances were filled with suspicion, and every movement felt calculated. The vague warnings on their screens still lingered in their minds, making them question every interaction. Then came the first crack in the foundation. An email was leaked. No one knew who had done it, but by mid-morning, an anonymous message had spread through the office like wildfire. The email contained a list of names, employees rumored to be under review by the CEO. Some were considered top performers, others barely noticeable, but the real shock was at the bottom of the email. There was a name that no one expected. It was the CEO's most trusted advisor. The room buzzed with whispers. If someone that close to the CEO was under scrutiny, then no one was safe. This wasn't just a loyalty test, it was a purge. Then, chaos erupted. Security walked into the office, heading straight for the advisor's desk. There was no discussion, no argument. He was asked to stand, hand over his badge, and leave the building immediately. Employees watched in stunned silence. A senior executive tried to intervene. "This has to be a mistake. He's been with the company for years." But security didn't stop. The advisor didn't fight it either, he simply gathered his things, gave one last glance around the office, and walked out. The message was clear, no one was untouchable. But why him? Had he betrayed the CEO? Or had someone framed him? It didn't take long for paranoia to set in. People began pointing fingers, questioning their own coworkers. Who leaked the email? Was it a trap? Had the CEO done this on purpose, to see who would react? Then another email arrived. Betrayal is always closer than you think. Trust wisely. That was the breaking point. Some employees began forming alliances, whispering in corners, sharing information in secret. Others withdrew, refusing to speak to anyone, afraid that one wrong word could seal their fate. And then, for the first time since the test had begun, the CEO himself appeared. He walked through the office, slow and deliberate, observing the people around him. His expression was unreadable. When he stopped at the now empty desk of his former advisor, he simply smirked, as if he had expected this outcome all along. He turned to the employees and said one thing: loyalty isn't about what you say. It's about what you do when no one is watching. Then he walked away, leaving behind more questions than answers. But one thing was clear: someone in the office had betrayed the advisor. And if betrayal had already begun, no one was safe. The office had changed. What was once a thriving workplace had transformed into a battlefield of whispers and uncertainty. Every glance felt like a silent interrogation. Every movement was analyzed. Who could be trusted? Who had betrayed the CEO's advisor? And most importantly, who was next? Some employees had already begun playing the game, forming quiet alliances, trading information in hushed conversations. Others stayed completely silent, hoping to avoid attention. Then, something unexpected happened. Late in the afternoon, a junior employee received an email directly from the CEO's office. It was brief, just a single line: "Come to my office now." His hands trembled as he stood up. The entire floor watched in silence as he walked toward the CEO's door. When he stepped inside, the door clicked shut behind him. The CEO sat behind his massive desk, calm as always. His sharp eyes studied the young employee for a moment before speaking. "Tell me," the CEO said, his voice quiet but firm. "If you had the chance to expose a liar in this company, would you do it?" The young man swallowed hard. He had no idea why he was here. He wasn't an executive. He wasn't even high on the chain of command. Why had the CEO called him in? I don't know," he admitted. "I guess it depends on what they did." The CEO leaned forward slightly. "And if they betrayed someone who trusted them?" The young man hesitated. Was this a trick question? Was the CEO trying to test his morals? "I would want proof first," he said carefully. The CEO smirked. "Interesting." Then, he slid a folder across the desk. "Read." With shaky hands, the young man opened it. His eyes widened. Inside were documents, emails, meeting notes, private messages. And at the center of it all was something shocking. The CEO's most trusted advisor, the one who had been escorted out by security, had been framed. Someone had set him up. And worse, that someone was still inside the company. The CEO watched as the realization hit. "You're the first person to see this besides me," he said. "I had to see if you'd tell the truth, before I showed you the truth." The young man looked up, completely stunned. "You knew he was innocent?" The CEO's expression didn't change. "I knew there was a traitor," he said simply. "But I wanted to see how people would react before I revealed the truth." The young man's heart pounded. "Why are you showing me this?" The CEO leaned back in his chair, watching him closely. "Because sometimes, the people who talk the least see the most." The weight of those words settled in. The young man realized, he wasn't being tested like the others. He was being recruited. For what? He didn't know. But one thing was clear. The CEO had never been testing loyalty. He had been testing something else entirely. And now, the real game was about to begin. The young man left the CEO's office, with his mind spinning. Everything he thought he knew about this test had been shattered. The CEO wasn't just looking for loyalty, he was searching for something deeper, something more valuable. But what? As he walked back to his desk, he noticed the shift in the office. The tension had reached its peak. The betrayal of the CEO's advisor had left everyone shaken, and now, paranoia was consuming them. People were starting to break. 2 employees were arguing in the hallway, accusing each other of being spies. A senior executive had locked himself in his office, refusing to speak to anyone. Even the quiet, reserved workers were showing signs of stress, glancing over their shoulders, hesitating before speaking, second-guessing every email they sent. And then, something happened that pushed everything over the edge. At exactly 3 p.m., another company-wide email appeared in everyone's inbox. The final stage of the test has begun. The traitor is still among you. And now, it's time to see who truly deserves to stay. The message sent a shockwave through the office. It was clear now, someone was about to be exposed. But who? People began to panic. Some gathered in groups, trying to figure out the next move. Others sat frozen at their desks, their faces pale. No one knew how the CEO was planning to reveal the truth, but everyone knew that once he did, things would never be the same. Then, one of the employees, a mid-level manager who had been overly confident throughout the test, stood up and started walking toward the CEO's office. "I'm not waiting for this anymore," he muttered. "If I go first, maybe I can get ahead of whatever's coming." The office watched in silence as he knocked on the CEO's door. "Come in," came the calm voice from inside. The door shut behind him. Minutes passed. Then 10. Then 20. The silence in the office was suffocating. People exchanged worried glances. What was happening in that room? Then, suddenly, the door opened again. The manager stepped out. His face was drained of color, his expression blank. He didn't say a word as he walked back to his desk, grabbed his coat, and headed for the exit. He didn't look at anyone. He didn't say goodbye. He just left. Everyone watched in stunned silence. Then, as if on cue, another email arrived. "The first has fallen. Who's next?" The breakdown had officially begun. And the worst was still to come. The atmosphere in the office had changed completely. Fear had taken hold of every employee, each of them wondering if they were next. No one knew what the CEO was truly looking for, and now that the first employee had fallen, it was clear, this wasn't a test anyone could simply pass by playing it safe. More resignations followed. Some employees, too scared to wait for their fate, handed in their notices without hesitation. Others tried to play it cool, pretending they weren't affected, but their shaking hands and nervous glances betrayed them. The CEO watched everything unfold from his glass-walled office. His eyes scanned the room, taking in every reaction, every shift in behavior. He had seen these patterns before, fear exposing the weakest, betrayal coming from unexpected places. Then, a voice interrupted his thoughts. "You're pushing them too far." The CEO turned. It was his senior executive, the only person in the company who ever dared to question him directly. "This isn't just about loyalty, is it?" the executive continued, stepping forward. "You're not testing their commitment to the company. You're testing their ability to survive." The CEO didn't respond immediately. Instead, he let the words settle, as if weighing their truth. Then, he spoke. "Loyalty is easy when things are good," he said. "The real test is who stays when everything is falling apart." The executive crossed his arms. "And what if you're wrong? What if the ones who are leaving aren't disloyal, but just tired of the game? What if you're forcing out the people who actually cared?" For the first time, the CEO's expression shifted, just slightly. It wasn't doubt, not yet. But it was something close. The executive sighed. "You built this company with people, not chess pieces. And now, you're treating them like they're disposable. If this is a test, what exactly are you trying to prove? That fear is stronger than trust?" The CEO remained silent. Outside, another employee packed up their things, avoiding eye contact with their coworkers as they left the office for the last time. The CEO exhaled slowly, watching. Then, he said something that surprised even himself. "Maybe I miscalculated." The executive raised an eyebrow. "Are you admitting you're wrong?" The CEO didn't answer. But as he looked out at what was left of his once loyal team, he knew something had shifted. This test wasn't revealing loyalty. It was exposing his own failures. And now, he had to decide, was it too late to fix what had been broken? The office, once a place of ambition and collaboration, had become a wasteland of empty desks and broken trust. Those who remained sat in silence, unsure of what was coming next. The CEO, who had always controlled every outcome, now found himself facing a reality he hadn't predicted. His test had worked, just not in the way he had intended. He had set out to expose disloyalty, to find the ones who would stand by him when things got difficult. But instead, he had driven away some of the most capable, dedicated people in his company. The ones who had left weren't the weak ones. They were the ones who refused to play his game. The realization hit harder than he expected. The CEO stood at his office window, watching the employees who had remained. They weren't the ones he had expected to stay. Some of them had survived out of fear, not loyalty. Others had been too uncertain to act, paralyzed by the weight of the test. And then there were the quiet ones, the ones who had never scrambled to prove themselves, who had never tried to manipulate the test in their favor. They had simply done their jobs, watching and waiting, refusing to let paranoia consume them. Those were the ones who had passed. Not because they were blindly loyal, but because they understood something he had forgotten: true loyalty isn't demanded, it's earned. The CEO turned to his senior executive, the only one who had challenged him throughout this ordeal. "I made a mistake," he admitted. His voice was calm, but there was weight behind his words. The executive studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah," he said. "You did." The CEO walked out of his office, stepping onto the main floor where the remaining employees sat. They looked up at him, their faces weary, their eyes filled with questions. "I won't waste your time," he said. "This test was never about making you choose between your jobs and your dignity. It was supposed to show who was truly committed to this company. But I see now that I tested the wrong thing." Silence. No one knew what to say. "I let fear take the place of trust," the CEO continued. "And that was a failure on my part, not yours." A murmur spread through the room. No one had expected this. "I can't undo what's been done," he admitted. "But I can tell you this: loyalty isn't about proving yourself in a test. It's about showing up, day after day, through the good and the bad, even when no one is watching." He exhaled, the weight of his own lesson settling in. "For those of you who stayed, not out of fear, but because you believe in what we're building, you have my trust." For the first time in weeks, the tension in the room eased. Some employees exchanged glances, others nodded subtly. They weren't sure what would happen next, but something had changed. The CEO had learned his lesson. And in the end, that was the most important test of all.